From Isaiah 53, verse 7, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And from Revelation 5, I saw a scroll in the right hand of the one seated on the throne. It was written on both sides, fastened with 7 seals. I also saw a powerful angel calling out in a voice like thunder, "Is there anyone who can open the scroll and break its seals?" There was no one in heaven, no one on earth, no one from the underworld able to break open the scroll and read it. I wept and wept and wept that no one was found able to open the scroll, able to read it. One of the elders said, "Don't weep. Look, the Lion from tribe Judah, the root of David's tree, has conquered. He can open the scroll, can rip through the 7 seals." So I looked, and there, surrounded by a throne, animals, and elders, was a lamb slaughtered but standing tall. 7 horns he had and 7 eyes, the 7 spirits of God sent into all the earth. He came to the one seated on the throne and took the scroll from his right hand. The moment he took the scroll, the 4 animals and 24 elders fell down and worshiped the Lamb. Each had a harp and each had a bowl, a gold bowl filled with incense, the prayers of God's holy people. The 4 animals and 24 elders sang a new song. "Worthy is the Lamb. Take the scroll, open its seals. Slain, paying in blood, you bought men and women. Bought them back from all over the earth, bought them back for God. Then you made them a kingdom, priests for our God, priest kings to rule over the earth." I looked again. I heard a company of angels around the throne, the animals and the elders, 10,000 times 10,000 their number, 1,000 after 1,000 after 1,000 in full song. "The slain Lamb is worthy. Take the power, the wealth, the wisdom, the strength. Take the honor, the glory, the blessing." Then I heard every creature in heaven and earth, in underworld and sea, join in all voices in places, singing, "To the one on the throne, to the Lamb, the blessing, honor, the glory, the strength, for age after age after age." The 4 animals called out, "Oh yes." The elders fell to their knees and worshiped.
And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So last Friday, when I was leading one of those morning meditations that Will talked about, in the middle of it, my cell phone blew up with text messages, and I was tempted to crack an eye open and look, but I didn't. Afterwards, you can imagine what all those text messages were about, informing me and discussing calls to action in light of the mosques, what happened with the mosques in New Zealand. I was moved that afternoon to join our Muslim friends at the AMI for their afternoon worship and to offer prayers for the dead with them, as were actually a number of countrysiders and lay people and leadership from Temple Israel as well. It was very moving to see the show of support there. And during the service, Imam Jamal spoke very powerfully about how these times of adversity, how they tend to test the mettle of people of faith, calling us to move from fear into faith and acts of courage. And he, like Rabbi Brian Stoller had done after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, noted just how the acts of those who perform acts of terror actually have caused the exact opposite reaction that they wanted. Instead of widening the divide between people, they've actually brought people together. And in fact, he noted, just as Brian had, that in America today, we are far more together as people of different faiths than we have been in all of American history. There's something about fear that drives us to then our source of comfort and hope. And in comfort and hope, we find far more than comfort. We find faith, and courage. Now, as he spoke, I was reminded of actually the early centuries of Christianity when Rome, through acts of terror, sought to eliminate Christianity. They figured if they could just kill enough of us, the rest of us who remained would, in fear, just go away. We would quit our churches and never be heard from again. But they made a critical miscalculation. They thought that the God of Jesus did not exist, or at least was not very powerful. But what they found was when people of faith were afraid, they turned to the God of Jesus and found a real God, a real and powerful God. They found a God who moved them through their adversity to change their fear into faith, change that terrible uncertainty into hope, and transform affliction into even love. Love even for those who consider them their enemies. And with this faith, hope, and love as a foundation, it moved them to acts of courage, to stand for their faith, not shrink in the light of the terror that was going on constantly. Now, I'm reminded that the Romans actually couldn't kill enough Christians to keep up with the pagans who were converting to Christianity. Because when you have a community that is actually driven to their source and discover faith, hope, and love and courage in the midst of it, an amazing thing happens to that community. I mean, they become more vibrant, not less. They become more together, not less. They become more excited about their faith, not less, and more willing to act on their faith, not less. And so the pagan community looking in on this found this tremendously attractive, so much so that they were willing to risk their own lives to join with these crazy, wonderful people called Christians. There are many stories about this happening. One of them is about the 40 martyrs from Sebaste, which is a region in what would have been southern Armenia or eastern Turkey in modern times. There were these Roman soldiers who confessed that they were Christian, and so the Romans sentenced them to death by freezing. So on a bitterly cold night, they were led naked into the center of a frozen pond. And then the Romans set up a hut on the edge of the pond with a hot bath in it. They said, if you'll just renounce your faith, you can take a nice bath and go away. Well, they stood there all as one. And finally one, though, couldn't take it any longer. He went to the bath and went away, leaving 39 soldiers on the ice. But in the morning, they counted 40 soldiers on the ice. Where did that extra one come from? Well, it was one of the guards who, seeing the faith of these people out on the ice and the sense of community about them, and even being struck by this glow of love that was just so palpably present in them, he converted on the spot to Christianity, stripping himself naked and joining the others on the ice, figuring he'd rather die as a follower of Jesus than live as a subject of the Roman Empire. Story after story is like this, and really happened to the point where we know that Christianity eventually overcame that empire. Now, with that as a backdrop, ancient and unfortunately modern, we might be able to better understand this crazy book of Revelation and this crazy chapter we just heard from. Now, for those of you who are just joining us, just note that the approach we're taking to Revelation is that was not written to predict events that were going to happen 2,000, 3,000 years later, but rather John is speaking in highly metaphorical language about present events and about the present community and dynamics there. So in this vision that he offers us in chapter 5, he sees himself in the heavenly community and then is trying to use human language to describe that which is ultimately not able to be described in language. He's trying to describe a spiritual experience internally using these external metaphors. And so one of those metaphors being this scroll that is written on both sides and sealed with 7 seals, he sees, and which represents the fullness of God's will. That if you open those 7 seals and unscroll the scroll, that God's will would be then let out too for the entire creation. And he hears this voice calling with thunder and lightning, saying, "Who is able to open the scroll, the seven seals?" And it says, no one in heaven or earth or in the underworld was found who was able, who was powerful enough to open those seven seals, provoking John to weep bitterly, because he, like all of us, yearned for God's will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so as he wept, though, an elder turns to him and says, "Don't weep. There actually is one who can open the scroll, and and it's the Lion of Judah." And so he turns to look for this Lion of Judah, and what he finds there is not a lion, but a lamb. Both metaphors, of course, for Jesus, the Lion of Judah and the lamb. And this lamb is not just any lamb. The word in Greek is actually not the usual term for lamb. The word in Greek is Arnion, which means not lamb, but lambkin, like a newborn lamb, barely out of its mother's womb. It's like the weakest image you can possibly find for power. I mean, this lamb you wouldn't expect to be able to open a lunchbox, let alone the seven seals that no one else in heaven and earth can open. What's the message here? That spiritual power appears to us as weakness, but actually spiritual power operates on the exact opposite trajectory. What we think is powerful is actually weakest in reality, and what we think is weakest is actually most powerful. Spiritual power works in the exact opposite direction as worldly power. So the ultimately powerful thing is this weak little lambkin. In fact, it's even weaker than this, because he says it bore the marks of slaughter. I mean, how low can you go? And just when you think you've gone to the bottom of weakness, he drops the bottom out even further. It's so incredibly weak that it is the only one who is powerful enough to open these seven seals. And boy, he'd better be powerful. Because not only is this lamb meant to, Arnion, meant to open the seven seals, but he, in the book of Revelation, is the one to go against. Arnion is meant to go against Therion, which in Greek means the beast. Now, the beast, its whole purpose in Revelation is to ensure that its will is done on earth, that his will is done on earth, not heaven's will. The beast is said to have 7 heads and 10 crowns arranged around its heads. Those are metaphors for Rome, incidentally. 7, used with respect to the 7 heads, is a metaphor for the 7 hills of Rome. And 10 is the mark of supreme political power. So he's all speaking code language, again, because he doesn't want the Romans to separate his head from his shoulders, because he's in a Roman prison, right? So he's speaking about this. The Rome is the beast. And making this, if in case this beast isn't powerful enough, it says that the beast gets its power from a dragon, that's the metaphor for Satan. And then the beast actually has a sidekick, another beast, whose role is to make sure that all of the earth turns its worship to this bigger beast. That smaller beast representing probably the allies of Rome. So it's basically the power of Arnion versus Jesus versus the entire Roman Empire. So, friends, in this corner, weighing in at 33 1/3 ounces, is Arnion. In this corner, weighing in at 666 million pounds, is Therion. Who would you put your money on? Who would you bet your life on in this battle? Of course, we can look back. We have the power of hindsight. We know that within 3 centuries, this upstart religion that was formed in this obscure country that had been conquered long ago, following a God said to be revealed in a man who was crucified after being tortured, this religion would end up being the dominant religion in all the Roman Empire. We know this because we look back on this, but what amazes me, what dumbfounds me, and inspires me is that John of Patmos knew this well before such events would have any suggestivity to them. John of Patmos and other Christians knew what was happening and what would happen. They knew that the powers that we count as utterly weak are actually the most powerful if you stay connected to them. This corner, Arnion, this corner, Therion. Who do you put your money on in your life today?
From 1 Corinthians, for God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you are wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. He is the source of your life in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. And from Tao Te Chang, a great country is like a lowland. It is the meeting ground of the universe, the mother of the universe. The female overcomes the male with stillness, lying low in stillness. Therefore, if a great country gives way to a smaller country, it will conquer the smaller country. And if a small country submits to a great country, it can conquer the great country. Therefore, those that would conquer must yield, and those that conquer do so because they yield. A great nation needs more people. A small country needs to serve. Each gets what it wants. It is fitting for a great nation to yield.
So the Tao Te Ching is the primary philosophical and religious text of Taoists. It was written by Lao Tzu in around the 6th century BCE. And one of the things that the Taoists have always got to, which is the early Christians also got, is that spiritual power works in the exact opposite direction as worldly power, that what appears weak is actually far more powerful than what appears to us as strong. So it talks about how a great nation, if it is to be great, needs to become like a lowland. All the water flows from the highlands to the lowland, right? And so a great nation, it conquers the smaller ones, not through wielding power over them, but rather by coming under them, by taking their interests as seriously as their own nation. literally loving their neighbor as themselves. What the dynamic is that if a smaller nation then discovers that the larger nation is actually acting in the interests of the smaller one, it's a lot better to support that great nation than it is to fight against it and try to subvert it. So it's basically, it's the principle that governs U.S. policy, right, with respect to foreign. Okay, well, I thought that was funnier than it apparently was. But yeah, the might makes right doesn't tend to work. If a great nation is to be, take its own interests first, and I have no objection to America first as long as it's in the spiritual power dynamic, what you do is you need to pay attention to the success of those who you hope will be aligned with you. That is the way you last in the long term. If you don't, what you find is all your resources, your energy, your finances, and your blood goes into fighting against those who then want to subvert you and fight against you into your opposition, fighting against the opposition. So this power dynamic, this way of weakness that is actually strong, it has real effects in the real world. It's not just simply kind of pietistic, warm, fuzzy kind of things. And it works for the little guys just like it does for the big guys. It's, as the Tao Te Ching says, a smaller nation, if it wants to defeat a larger one, yields to it. And Gandhi used this principle against the British Empire. He knew that if they were to defeat the British, they could not, or that definitely used the power of Therion versus Arnion. He could not fight Therion with Therion's weapons. They would lose before they even began. So he had to yield in the face of those weapons and fight the power of death and weapons with a different kind of force, which Gandhi called soul force, the power of Arnion. And soul force, he said, is ruled by the law of love, not the law of the jungle. He described it this way. He said, fear and love are contradictory. Love is reckless in giving away, oblivious to what it gets in return. Love wrestles with the world as with the self and ultimately gains mastery over all other feelings. My daily experience is that every problem lends itself to a solution if we are determined to make the law of truth and nonviolence the law of life. For truth and nonviolence are, to me, faces of the same coin. The law of love will work just as the law of gravitation will work. The rule of love will work just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not. The more I work at this law, the more I feel the delight in life, the delight in the scheme of this universe. It gives me a peace and a meaning of the mysteries of nature. The same, as we are aware, Gandhi was a significant influence on Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. King was influenced by Gandhi and Jesus, and he frequently said, Jesus gave me the message, and Gandhi gave me the method. And that method of nonviolent resistance, of soul force, worked for King in dramatic ways. One person named Philip Yancey, you may know if you ever read the Jesus I Never Knew, describes the effect of that soul force that King wielded on him early on. He writes this way, he says, Martin Luther King Jr. had some weaknesses, but one thing he got right. Against all odds, against all instincts of self-preservation, he stayed true to the principle of peacemaking. He did not strike back. Where others called for revenge, he called for love. The civil rights marchers put their bodies on the line before the sheriffs with nightsticks, the fire hoses, the snarling German shepherds. That, in fact, was what brought them the victory they had been seeking for so long. Historians point to one event as the single moment in which the movement attained critical mass of public support for its cause. It occurred on a bridge outside Selma, Alabama, when Sheriff Jim Clark turned his policemen loose on unarmed black demonstrators. The American public, horrified by the scene of violent injustice, at last gave its assent to the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. I grew up, writes Yancey, in Atlanta, across town from Martin Luther King Jr., and I confess with some shame that while he was leading marches in places like Selma and Montgomery and Memphis, I was on the side of the white sheriffs with the nightsticks and the German shepherds. I was quick to pounce on his moral flaws and slow to recognize my own blind sin. But because he stayed faithful by offering his body as a target but never as a weapon, he broke through my moral calluses. The real goal, King used to say, was not to defeat the white man, but to awaken a sense of shame within the oppressor and challenge his false sense of superiority. The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. And that is what Martin Luther King Jr. finally set in motion, even in racists like me. Now, the power of Therion is impressive to many. The powers of death, the powers of worldly strength are mighty impressive to many, but those who follow Arnion's path know that death cannot be conquered by the instruments of death. It can only be conquered by the power of love. Hate cannot be conquered by more hate, but rather by the power of life and love. No, this works because, as the Scriptures tell us, God is love. So when you connect with love, you actually connect with God. And if you're going to pit God, the power of God, against the power of the world, guess who wins? Right? It wins because, as Paul says, God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom. God's weakness is stronger than human strength. So in the end, love always wins. And this is what people who seek to destroy mosques or synagogues or churches fail to understand. They fail to understand that you could actually never wipe out a church or a mosque or a synagogue. You can never kill it, provided the people there stay true to their faith. You could destroy a building. You could destroy a body. But what you can't destroy is the power of life and love that animates the body within the building. That never goes away. That wins every time. Wouldn't it be amazing if in the midst of all this affliction and all the powers that seek to divide us in our country, in our world today, Christians, Muslims, Jews, and all people of faith reconnected more strongly than other to the power of Arnion versus Therion, realizing that in the end, this is the true power, that weakness, what appears to be weak to the world, is actually the source of our greatest strength, such that our business is not about erecting higher and higher walls to protect us against the enemy's weapons, but rather taking down the walls and building bridges of respect and love, even with those who consider us their enemies. In this corner, weighing in at 33 1/3 ounces, Arnion. In this corner, weighing in at 666 million pounds, Therion. Who will you bet your money and your life